Welcome to this week's edition of SafeDefend Live. I'm joined today by Director of Training, Dr. Vecchi. How are you, Dr. V?
Doing well, Phil. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So we were talking a little bit. I think I want to hear about how people's perception and their theories. How does that drive actual practice?
Oh, actually, that fits in perfectly. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great.
It's almost like you asked me to do that.
Yeah, it's just like I asked you to, isn't it? Yeah, I think people, when you hear the word theory and stuff, people get, oh, that's too academic and too, egg-headed and things like that. But really, everything we do is based on, having a theory of something. Like even in a trial, right? There's the prosecutor and the defense. They have a theory about what happened, and then they try to use the facts to support that theory to explain the case. It's no different in research and even in police operations. Police operations are based on theory, right? So you have like community policing or problem-oriented policing. These are based on principles that drive an action, right? And so when you're talking about threat assessment, you're talking about preventing active killer attacks, targeted violence. You still got to have a theory that that drives your operations, so to speak, right? And then you're constantly going back and forth and retesting that theory to make sure it's working. As long as it's working, we keep moving forward.
Yeah, and I think like you said, I mean that's everything in life. I mean and I think it's for topics like this where there are so many variables and so many unknowns. How else are you going to get to the best solution?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, if you could put that first slide for me, I can.
You bet.
A little bit better. There we go. So anyone who's in criminal justice or who's had courses in criminology, things like that, they probably ran into this theory. It's a very famous theory. It's called routine activity theory. It was written back in the early 70s, I think. It's been around for a very long time. And it was written by two criminologists, Cohen and Felsen were their last names. And there's been a lot of talk on this. This has been used in lots of, research books, dissertations, backing of police. And the way it works, and the way I'm going to try to connect it to, prevention and what, the school district could do, right? Or when you're saying your threat assessment, prevention policies and practice and things like this, is to understand that what we're dealing with is the crime. Now they talked about it in terms of crime, and the idea behind the original theory was that if you got someone who's motivated to do the crime, you got a target that's available to them or a suitable victim, and the cops aren't around, then the attack's going to happen. And so over time, what police have done and what people have done to prevent violence and crime is they've focused on, let's say, adding more patrol, right, or adding surveillance cameras or things that you might do to increase the capable guardian, right, which is basically the police presence or I'm going to get caught,
right,
right. And then the other thing is, okay, well, let's make a target or a victim less of a target or victim. So whatever you can do. So that might be giving them, practices and things to do to make them less of a victim, maybe have them not be in a specific area at a certain time, things like this. That's where everything's focused on. Even if you look at school districts and things, you talk about the target hardening, you talk about, physical security, right? So you have, cameras up there, you got metal detectors, you've got, all this stuff. And that's meant to, according to this approach, increase the capable guardian or the fact that, hey, they might get caught or we have a better way of getting them caught. And so in my experience, the focus has always been on what can we do to make the victim less of a victim, and what can we do to make the police or the surveillance or the deterrence better, right? And so what's a little bit different in the perspective that we're coming from here at the SafeDefend Academy is that's in place. We've got, you look at Parkland, Florida, you look at Robb Elementary, right, in Uvalde and stuff like this.
Yep.
They have a lot of this stuff. In fact, most schools have a lot of this, making the victim less of potential victim, the increasing the, cameras and metal detectors and target hardening, but yet this stuff still happens. And so the idea here and the approach I'm taking is that let's certainly don't touch that, or I mean, we want to keep that as important, but let's move the shift. Let's shift the focus to the motivated offender, because if you basically if you take either one of these circles away, there's no attack or there's no crime, right? And so if you demotivate the offender or make it so that that offender no longer is willing or wants to kill somebody, right, then there's no crime. The attack is averted. You prevented the violence. And that's one of the key points or the basis of the theory I'm talking about. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No. You're fine. You're fine. I was getting to ask if you want me to go to another slide, but it automatically went.
Yeah, I'm flipping it here. I got
Okay,
control.
you got it. You have the calm. You have the calm.
I do. So essentially, if you take that basic thing, we're talking about motivation. Now, I'm coming from a behavioral standpoint, right? Behavioral science type, standpoint on this. And our job is to figure out, okay, what's motivating the offender, right? So if we've established that if you take away the motivation to kill, you prevent violence, then the question is, let's look at motivation. And we've talked about this in previous SafeDefend lives, but we know that the motivation for almost all the school killings or school attacks is a basis of grievance. They feel that they were wronged. Right. They feel that they're persecuted. They were bullied. There's a big loss in their life or whatever. And so one of the things that's kind of interesting on that is, in applying the concept of hostage negotiation. People are always interested in hostage and crisis negotiation. Well, how does it work, right? Well, this is how it works. The assumption is that the person's in crisis, right? Which is the same thing that happens to a kid that's bullied. They get to the point that they can't deal with it, and they feel no one's there to help them, and they go into crisis. And the crisis gets to be so bad that they decide that violence is the answer, and they start on that pathway, and then they end up attacking if they're not stopped. And so the idea on this is to deal with the crisis, because it's the crisis that is the result of the grievance and is the motivation that's driving to the action or the desire to kill. And so we touched on this before, but I think it's worth talking about, is that you got like transient type grievances, things that don't amount to violence, right? Like you have a bad day, like we talked about before, but it's the perception of that person, and that perception that they can't deal with the situation. Okay, they can't deal with the situation. They can't cope. They have no social support. They probably tried to get help. It didn't work. Then bang, now they are in a crisis in their head, and that becomes the motivation to kill, right?
Right.
And so what's really cool about this is that if we as teachers, SROs, administrators and things, look at the potential offender, not as a monster, but as a child or a person, a kid who's in crisis, almost always just taking a crisis intervention approach, dealing with that kid, being empathetic and non-judgmental and setting that kid down. When you assess this properly, right, you become the social support. And then if you are the social support, the crisis goes away, and therefore the motivation to kill goes away. And I think that is something, that whole concept right there is something that is completely, overlooked or not taken into consideration when dealing with targeted violence. And then at the end of the day, if I kill the motivation, right, if the motivation goes away, you have to have these three things in play at once to make the attack happen. If I do that and remove the motivation to kill, then the attack goes away, and I've essentially prevented violence. That's the whole concept of preventing this stuff.
Well, and that's that left to bang, right? I mean, we want to catch it before it gets to that point, and hopefully intervene, help this young person or this individual, if it's a student or whoever it may be, get them in a place where they can get help and prevent the act of violence. Many times, obviously, as you said, there's something that's led to that, and got to have our eyes and ears open. Doc, I'm going to give you final thoughts today as we have a Super Bowl weekend, right? I know everybody in Kansas City's rocking and rolling.
Yes, we are. We are very, very excited. All everybody's talking about. But go Chiefs. Hope they win. I'm certainly a fan, and just want to leave it with this. One of the best things you can do is when you see a kid in crisis or a kid having a bad day, sit them down and talk to them. And oftentimes that's all it takes to stop the violence, or at least get in front of it.
Few words of encouragement, letting them know that somebody cares and there's somebody there to listen to them. I agree very much with those words. Dr. V, we appreciate you very much. We'll see you next week on Safe Defend Live.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.